Level Up is a regular podcast that brings you topics to help you perform at work and in life at your very highest level. Your host is Dan Chiodo, an executive coach, corporate trainer, and author. He is president of Impact Training and Executive Coaching. And now, here's Dan.
I appreciate that, Jesse. Hi, everybody, and this is Level Up, another beautiful day here. This is the place to go when you want to grow. And the reason we always talk about leveling up is because we want you to do it in every aspect of your life. In our last episode, we talked about being a change agent and what that's all about. Well, this is the final episode of the 2020 season. So we've covered a lot of territory in almost 50 episodes, but what about something that could change your life? Today's episode brings us a rather serious subject, yet an essential one, regardless of your age or stage in life. Our guest today has always been welcome in the Level Up studios. He brings us some very solid thinking. He is President Emeritus of Freeman Health System in Missouri and the Midwest Transplant Network in Kansas City. And I'd like to welcome back Gary Duncan. Welcome, Gary.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. It's good to be back. We indeed have a different topic today.
I have slated advanced medical directives. So this isn't one of our typical topics, a little departure. So I'll let you introduce it and the significance to us.
Very good. Thank you, Dan. Well, when I've been on before, we've talked about developing a career, developing leadership skills, what to do if you're going to be on a board of directors, what behaviors when you're interviewing someone to look for that are going to be successful in the job as opposed to nice on the interview. And so we've covered a lot of business issues. And it's all about planning from the beginning of your career, all through your career to the end, and a happy retirement and family, and then, of course, the end. The topic we have today is a parallel to that process. So we're going to talk about advanced medical directives, get a couple examples of it, and medical directives run through your life from the beginning to end, just like your career. And medical directives are very live, they're organic, so that it's not a piece of paper that you scratch your head, figure out what you want to do, sign it, throw it in the lockbox and go, okay, we got that over with, what's next? It's a planning process through your whole life. So as we talk today, we'll talk about that, Dan.
That sounds good. Let me ask you, what caused you to do your first personal revocable trust?
Well, that kind of brings us back to the business sector. In the early 90s, at Freeman Health System, we had a new boss. And he sat down one day there were three of us on the senior team at that time and said, do you all have a trust? And we all kind of looked at each other out of the corner of our eye and we said, well, we've got 401k, or we've got a retirement plan, or we've got brokerage, we've got whatever, we've got some stocks. He goes, no. I'm talking about having a trust for you or you and your spouse. And we said, no. He said, well, you need one because you're putting money away. You may have a SERP, all these things, but you need to plan that out. So he, as a benefit, said, I'm going to put away this amount of money, which I don't remember how much it was at the time. But he said, over the next year, I want you all to have a trust this time next year. And so we all did that. And Susie and I did one, and it was in 1994. And we did just what I said. We filled it all out, we signed it, put it in the lockbox, and didn't look at it again until this past February, which is a not to do. But anyway, that's the way it came to it. And I would say to our audience that in this day and age, with cafeteria plan on benefits, or someone may come to you and your work and say, we're planning on delivering a lump sum of money or bonus or salary or something, or we could do benefits. Are there any benefits that you think you might like? And I just would say to you, consider that as a very excellent benefit, probably one time from the boss or from the business, but you could get your first trust done. So that's how it came about. It was really through the largesse and kindness of the boss to give us a rather unexpected benefit.
Boy, that really is. That's excellent. Can you tell us a little bit about advanced medical directives and durable power of healthcare attorney?
I can outline those for you. First of all, I must say that I'm not an attorney. I don't even know a whole bunch about trust. I know a lot about my own. And there are lots of kinds of trusts. There are many documents that can go with them. But what I'm going to share with our audience is what's in ours and some of the things to look for, but highlight the medical portion of the trust.
That is excellent. Let's take a look.
Okay. And one of the things I want to say to them, and I think we have a list for them, so they'll see them as I read them off. But a note is that trusts pretty much are state laws. So know that as we're talking about this, you need to do them in your state of residence because you will have to follow those state laws. We're going to talk a little bit about federal law a little later, but by and large, your trust is going to be governed by the state law you're in.
Very good. Very good. Well, we'll look at this together.
All right. I think that you see on the list, the first thing in a trust always is the major trust agreement, and that kind of outlines what it covers. It's usually the thickest document. It goes through finances. It goes through hard assets. It'll have medical durability in it, et cetera. And then the last will and testament, you kind of outline how you want your assets to be broken up. Either if you're in a marital trust and your spouse has already passed, then when you pass, it tells how you want things divided up. And then you have general durable power of attorney, and that's exactly what it sounds like, is that at a time you cannot make a decision for yourself or are judged incompetent or won't make decisions for yourself, then you have a durable power of attorney. If you're married, it's probably your spouse, or it could be a son or a daughter that make determinations for you that have to be done, like paying bills, signing check, all of those kind of things. And then there's the durable power of attorney for healthcare matters, and you may hear me refer to this as medical proxy or healthcare proxy. And this is the person who, when you cannot make your own medical decisions, either because of incompetency or you just can't do it, then they can make those decisions for you. They might be the same person that's your general durable power of attorney, or in our case, it's someone different. It's important when you set that up that that person knows you very well and you communicate back and forth so that you know each other, and when you do need them to make decisions, they'll have a very good idea of what you want done. And then, of course, the living will with medical directive, this we refer to as the advanced medical directive, and it outlines specifically what you want done in terms of illness, accident, brain death, etc. And we're gonna do an exercise with that a little later. And it's very important because it's your wishes, and I think you can imagine that can change. There may be a little pandemic intervene. You could have an accident. You may have a different marital situation, and so you want that medical trust, you want that to move with you through your entire life. Then there are things like HIPAA authorization, because if you become incompetent and you haven't given anybody authority to have your medical information, it gets very difficult for whoever is your trustee. So you have a HIPAA authorization, you give a copy to your doctor, your family, your trust, your medical proxy. And then an interesting that certainly wasn't in our first trust is a digital asset authorization, because in this day and age, you have many items important to you that are tied up in some way or another in computers, digital locks, etc. And someone has to be authorized to get to those to administer your trust. And finally, you have tangible personal property listing, which is where you say, one granddaughter gets this and my uncle gets this, and so on and so on and so forth. So that's just a quick scan of what you might find in a trust document.
Excellent. Very good to take a look at, for sure. Well, that was a really interesting document to look at. And Gary, when you and I were talking, we mentioned Carthage, Missouri. So explain to everyone, that's near Joplin and Freeman Health System, correct?
That's correct. And the story I want to relate to you is one of the key stories that brought about patients' right to self-determination on health matters. And the story begins on January the 11th, 1983, about 12:40 a.m. in the morning on Kreml Road, which is outside of Carthage, and Nancy Cruzan was almost home. A neighbor at 12:40 heard a tremendous crash. The neighbor had just gone to bed, got up, dressed, went across the road, and found the car about 300 feet into the field on its top, but no one in it. And he searched around and found a body face down in the field. 1983, there wasn't a 911 to call, so he called the state patrol. They dispatched an ambulance from Carthage, Missouri. They came out. The paramedics were able to get a slight heartbeat on Nancy Cruzan, took her back to Carthage, and then sent her to the trauma center, which was Freeman West in Joplin, Missouri, which at that time, I worked there at that time as well. She brought into the ER, was stabilized. Trauma surgeon did emergency surgery on internal bleeding, but she was unconscious, did not respond at all. The parents and family were grateful she was alive, but couldn't speak to her because she was in a coma. 5 days into that, her dad was in the room. She opened her eyes and hope soared because, oh, she's awake. Unfortunately, her eyes opened, but she didn't have any stimulus response at all. So they wanted to get her into rehab, obviously. And the neurosurgeon said, yes, but before we do that, she's not getting enough hydration and nutrition because she couldn't swallow. So getting food and whatever down her was very difficult. And he said, I think she needs a feeding tube. This was a defining moment. The family said yes, because they're waiting for the rehab to occur. And so they okayed the feeding tube, the family and the husband. Went to Brady Rehabilitation in Joplin for a month. Nothing. She was still unresponsive, and they said, well, there's no rehab. We can't take care of her. So then she had sort of a whirlwind trip. Her husband sent her to his grandmother's, then to a nursing home. At the nursing home, she spiked 107 temperature, and her mother, Joyce Cruzan, said, well, maybe God will take her now, because she was already thinking this was not a good thing. But she spiked the temp, but she snapped back and survived. About 2 months later, was sent to the Missouri Rehabilitation Institute in Mount Vernon, Missouri, fairly close to their home. And so the husband began to fall out of the picture. So her parents were named co-guardians by Judge Teal in Carthage, the probate judge. About 6 months later, the parents went again to Judge Teal and oversaw her divorce. Then we fast forward about 2 years. And the parents by now are really thinking this is bad. Her dad was reading everything he could read about persistent vegetative state. And they signed orders with Missouri Rehab on a do not resuscitate order, no meds, no medical therapy, because that all seemed to be in vain at that time. 2 months later, in August of 86, Joe Cruzan, her dad, spilled the beans, so to speak. He was in the evening visiting her. There was a nurse there in rehab, and he said to her, her mother and I want to have the feeding tube pulled. The nurse reacted very, very negatively and said, you can't do that. That would be murder. And as Joyce, his wife, said, here we go. And so then people begin to realize what was going on. We fast forward a year. And in May of 1987, they meet William Colby for the first time. Bill Colby was a brand new attorney, only 5 years out of KU Law School. And he was at Shook Hardy in Kansas City and was assigned the Cruzan case pro bono. Little did he know. But at the end of that month, Mr. Colby came back and filed a letter to the Missouri Rehab Institute saying, remove the feeding tube. And of course, they denied that. And 2 weeks later, the Missouri Department of Health said, we will not do that without a court order. And so Mr. Colby went back to Judge Teal, the probate judge in Carterville, and asked for a trial for permission to remove the feeding tube. The judge consented. There was a trial in March of 88. And in July of 88, he rendered his decision. And his decision was that they could pull the feeding tube. The Cruzans were really happy because maybe the end was coming. What they didn't know was that the guardian ad litem, who was the attorney assigned to Nancy, was told by Judge Teal, as soon as I render my verdict, appeal it to the Missouri Supreme Court. So when that happened, of course, the family's hopes were dashed. They went before the Missouri Supreme Court, and the Missouri Supreme Court ruled in a 4-3 decision that they could not pull the feeding tube. So hopes were crushed. The family, there was more despair because what are we going to do? Well, Bill Colby, the attorney, the new young attorney, was not going to be deterred. And so he had a hearing, oral arguments before the United States Supreme Court in December of 1990 or 89. The Supreme Court heard the oral arguments. In March of the next year, when they sat down to see which cases they were going to try, only 2 justices agreed to hear the Cruzan case, and 4 justices have to approve the case. But instead of dropping the case, for some unknown reason, the justices tabled it. And a little later in that term, 4 justices, exactly what they needed, voted to take the case. And so on the last day of that term, in June of 1990, the United States Supreme Court, on a vote of 5-4, upheld the Missouri Supreme Court and denied taking out the feeding tube. Bill Colby's sitting in his office in Kansas City, and he has this 100-page opinion from the Supreme Court faxed to his office. He's reading through it, and as he's reading the majority opinion from Chief Justice William Rehnquist, he comes across what are now known as those 8 words. And he read it, and he read it, and he read it. And those 8 words were, unless, and I quote, the discovery of new evidence regarding the patient's intent. The discovery of new evidence regarding the patient's intent. Colby said he kept reading and he just couldn't believe his eyes because in this majority opinion, here was the potential. So having seen that at the end of August, he went back and filed a new motion in Judge Teal's probate court in Carthage, Missouri, to have a new trial. The trial was held in November with Judge Teal. Judge Teal, on December the 14th, 1990, ruled that the feeding tube could be removed. And so finally, the family felt like they could do justice to their daughter who was in this persistent vegetative state. And a lot went wrong, or not wrong, but a lot of chaos happened because Mount Vernon, Missouri was descended upon from all over the country with protesters against removing the feeding tube. In fact, there was even a midnight raid up the back stairway to try to get to her room, which was rebuffed by people. On December the 26th, 1990, Nancy Cruzan died and was finally at peace. The family, although very sad, could finally put this whole thing to rest. The good thing that came out of this, and I mentioned this earlier, was that in 1991, Congress passed the Patient Self-Determination Act. That was when advanced medical directives now became the law of the land. And why today, if you go into any healthcare organization are going to be admitted, inpatient or outpatient, they have to tell you about advanced medical directives, offer you information, and even forms. And so, although it was a very tragic story, and unfortunately for Joe and Nancy Cruzan, they did not live a lot longer after that and had lots of problems, particularly Joe. And he testified in Congress to help get that act passed. So that's the Cruzan story. It's a tragic one, and yet one that changed our entire outlook on advanced medical directives.
Amazing. What a story.
Incredible. I have the information. There's a book called Long Goodbye, the Deaths, plural, of Nancy Cruzan. And if any of our listeners are interested, I think it's available on Amazon or eBay. It's out of print, but it's still available. And it's quite an engaging story.
Yes, it is an engaging story. Thanks for sharing it. And advanced medical directives all stemming from that situation.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, this is probably a good time to take a short break. This is Dan Chiodo, and my guest today is Gary Duncan. And this episode is all about advanced medical directives. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. This is Level Up. Thank you for coming back to part 2 of Level Up. We knew that you would. I'm Dan Chiodo, host, and my guest is Gary Duncan, and we've been talking about advanced medical directives. So we'll continue that conversation. Gary, why would we hit the pause button because of COVID?
Well, it's an interesting, I had this experience. You remember I said earlier in our conversation that advanced medical directives are living, breathing documents. They're not static. Last February, March, when my wife and I were revising with our attorney, our advanced medical directives, we were at the part where it said, what would you do if you were on life support? I think almost everybody thinks life support, end of life. I mean, and nobody wants to be kept alive, just to be on life support. That's crazy. I don't want to be that way. And so we were talking about it, and I went through my advanced medical directive, and Susie was going through hers, and we're talking about life support, and she goes, well, wait a minute. With the pandemic, life support can actually be a therapy. I might want to be on life support, even if it didn't know how long, because I may come back and have a quality of life. And I sat there and thought, wow, I hadn't thought of that. And so anyway, that's why in the pandemic do we hit the pause button about advanced medical directives. Now, I'd like to, if we can put up the next slide, I'd like to walk our viewers through an exercise that they can kind of experience this.
Excellent. Let's take a look.
So let's put each of ourselves in a situation in the pandemic, and we're going into the hospital and we're going to have to be on life support. And so we ask 3 questions. We ask a question. If I become sick enough to need life support machine, a respirator, what do I do next? So possibly A, I want to be on life support machine if a machine is available. Or B, I want a respirator if it's available, but first consider others who be more likely to survive. I understand this would mean that I am more likely to die. Or C, I don't want a respirator even if it's available. I understand this would mean that I am more likely to die. So in the privacy of your own chair, what would your answer be to that if you were going to be put on life support? So you have your answer. Are you sure that your answer above says what you really mean? It may be, yes, I really mean that. Or you might hit the pause button and say, no, I need to ask questions and talk to a doctor and my loved ones before I can be sure. Because now I have some doubt about this life support thing. And this is where it's so important that your medical proxy or your healthcare power of attorney knows you well, and you've communicated, and they have your trust document so that they know exactly what you want in a contemporary format, not what you wanted 5 years ago or 10 years ago when you wrote your advanced medical directive. So you can see, if you put yourself in this kind of a situation, it's a dynamic, organic document that will help you through these kind of difficult times and have your wishes met when you can't answer for yourself. Makes
plenty of sense. Plenty of sense. Thank you for leading us through that exercise, Gary. Appreciate that. It makes sense to have a trust. So if I don't have one, what are the options to setting one up?
Well, Dan, the nice thing in this day and age, there are multiple places and ways that you can learn about advanced medical directives. Obviously, the internet is loaded with them. And the exercise I led you through is from the Center for Practical Bioethics. Their website has a lot of information and numerable websites so that you can really read about advanced medical directives and medical proxies or durable power for medicine, durable power of attorney. So there's a lot of places to look. You could also go to your local hospital because they have all the information, they have the forms, and there's someone there that could walk you through them. Plus, remember that when you do have an advanced medical directive, if your hospital doesn't have the copy, your signed copy in their possession when you're in the hospital, they can't do anything about your advanced medical directive. It has to be in their possession. You can go to a trust attorney who is a professional at doing this. You can go to your own personal attorney, and I'm sure they're going to know people who know that. You may go to, if you have an estate planner or somebody helps you with your planning to retirement, et cetera, they usually have some feel for that. The main thing is have somebody look at it that knows pretty much about advanced medical directive, so you have covered the things that you need to cover, because you don't want to come up short. And for example, it's a lot like organ donation. You can, in Missouri and many states, you can sign your driver's license and you have a signed contract if you want to be an organ donor. So there's many options to do this. The bigger question is, do it. It's one of those things that's very easy to put off. And you say, yep, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to make an appointment, and life intervenes and it doesn't get done. And then you find yourself in the case of Nancy Cruzan and her parents, because then, it's too late. An interesting thing about Nancy Cruzan, you remember I read you the eight words, those 8 words. Yeah. At that final trial, a woman who had a master's degree in education Nancy had worked for her previously at Stapleton Elementary School in Joplin, Missouri. And Nancy was a teacher's aide. There was another teacher's aide. The counselor and this teacher aide came to the trial and testified and said, they had 4 or 5 really profoundly developmentally disabled kids. And there was a girl that Nancy took care of a lot that could do nothing for herself. And they talked about and testified to conversations where Nancy said, this poor young lady is a vegetable. I would never want to be like that. She can't do anything for herself. If I'm ever in that state, I would much prefer to be dead. And it was the testimony of those 2 that convinced Teal that they met the requirement of Chief Justice Rehnquist, 8 words. So when you think about it, you think about the Cruzan story, if you don't do an advanced medical directive, a whole lot of people make decisions for you. People anywhere from the ambulance personnel to the Supreme Court and everyone in between, all of a sudden your life is being juggled by all of these people making decisions. The much simpler way is to say, these are the things I want. and then you can make your own decisions even when you can't make them.
Right. Well said, well said. This is something that, as you say, a person could put off, but regardless of age, we handle so many things in our lives and try to achieve all these things. And yet, if we don't take care of this, it's something that is very necessary and left undone. So, makes sense.
Yeah, it'd be like not perfecting your career by having blocks where you don't do any education. You just, well, I've got time for that.
Right.
Same.
Right. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate this very much. You have gone above and beyond today. This is, I know all you've done for the medical field, and you said you weren't an attorney, but you sure gave us a lot of legal things to think about and stated it very well. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate it very much. Hey, and thank you, our viewers, for tuning in to Level Up. We're glad that you are here today. And also want to tell you, there are show notes that you will find that take some of these ideas and let you think about them. And think about whether this is something that you've already done or if it's something that you have yet to do. So we always tell you, take one thing from every level up and try to get to that next level. But on this one, why don't you read it all and make a decision on that? Make decisions that help you feel like you're having a complete life and you've completed some necessary things in life. Really important. Hey, we'll save a seat for you on the next Level Up in our 2021 edition. Front row seat. We'll have it there for you. And now, Dustin, it's time to take us out. Cheers.
If you feel like this information was valuable to you, Dan would love it if you'd click the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or thoughts about today's episode, please leave a comment. Also, if you're a first-time subscriber, be sure to ring that bell to be notified about future episodes. To learn more about what Impact's training and development can do for you and your business, visit impactbydan.com, where you can find more information about executive coaching, corporate training, keynote speaking, and much more. Thanks so much for watching.